welcome to the online launch of our magnificent latest publication, Pollinators, Predators and Parasites, all about insects and the role they play in our Southern African environment. My name is Pippa Parker. I head up the Nature Division at Penguin Random House, an enviable position because it involves working with some of the most esteemed authors and experts in different fields. This project was no exception, and I'm delighted to welcome our panel of authors who will be enthralling you for the next 40 minutes or so. Many of you will know that insects are the most diverse group of organisms on Earth, and that there are more species of insect than any other animal group. As generally small creatures, however, they play a disproportionately large role in all terrestrial ecosystems, and they are integral to the working of life on so many levels. The authors write in their book that insects are the small things that make ecosystems function, and without them, life is unthinkable. Prof Clarke Scholtz, Jenny Scholtz, and photographer Hennie de Klerk have compiled this extraordinary work that unpacks the diverse and interesting and often remarkable aspects of insect life, bringing material that is largely locked up in journals and scientific papers into the popular realm. And this evening, they will be sharing some insights about and from the book. Chairing the discussion is Dr. John Ledger, an ardent conservationist and himself an entomologist who was responsible some years ago for revising and updating another landmark publication, Scaife's African Insect Life, a book that is now out of print, but that for many years was the standard reference on the subject. John has worn many hats through his varied and illustrious career, one that has spanned research, conservation, and energy. He served as director of the Endangered Wildlife Trust for 17 years, as a university lecturer in various departments at different stages of his career, as consultant, magazine and journal editor, and as author and co-author of several popular books and other publications. He is also the recipient of several prestigious environmental awards. I'd now like to hand over to John to take the program forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Pippa, and thank you for that nice introduction. And welcome to our panel, to Prof Clarke, and to Jenny, and to Hennie, and to all of the people who are participating in this webinar this evening. I hope you're going to enjoy it. There's certainly a visual feast waiting for us. Of course, Clarke is going to take us through some of the photographs that are in this book. Now, entomology, of course, started long before we had webinars, and long before we had the internet, and long before we had digital cameras. And when I was at Wits University many years ago, in our second year, we were introduced to the invertebrates, and we had to make an insect collection. And the only book that was available in those days, which we could use to identify the insects, was the original Scaife African Insect Life by Sidney Harold Scaife, published in 1953, published by Longmans in London, and illustrated by Dr. Scaife's very kind of amateurish black and white photographs, but some brilliant line drawings and also some color plates as well. Dr. Scaife passed away in 1976, and I actually knew his daughter, Bunty Rowan, who's an ornithologist, and we were at a congress in the Seychelles, and I said to her, you know, your dad's book is absolutely marvelous. Somebody should revise it one day. And much to my surprise, I was invited to revise it in 1976. I got together a bunch of people to help me, and we had Anthony Bannister, who was a fantastic insect photographer, but he used film cameras, and we came up with this book, which Pippa was talking about, African Insect Life, revised by John Ledger and Anthony Bannister, and that went on to do very well. In 1985, Professor Clarke here and Eric Holm put together this book, which is The Insects of Southern Africa, a lovely book. Didn't have photographs, but it had fantastic line drawings and also color paintings. And there have been a number of other publications of a specialized nature, a few butterfly books, wonderful book on dragonflies and damselflies, and a field guide to insects, which is very good. But all of those books were kind of based on taxonomy and identification of insects. And nobody has ever come up with the ecology and the role of insects as system engineers, as pollinators, as predators and parasites, until this wonderful book came along. And it is an outstanding piece of work. This is what it looks like. Absolutely magnificent. The photography is out of this world, but of course we've come a long way with photography. We're in a totally different technical era. The other thing that's happened in entomology is that our entomologists have revised their ideas of how the insects are related to each other. So there's a whole new taxonomy about the insects, and this book adopts the latest taxonomy. So I'm now going to switch over to Professor Clarke Scholtz and ask him how this concept came about to produce this fantastic book. Clarke, over to you.
Thanks, John. And before I start on the history, I would just like to say what an immense pleasure it is to have you as the chair of this panel, somebody that we all looked up to when we were in our youth, and all used the Scaife book as our introduction to entomology. So to have come full circle again is an immense pleasure, and thank you very much for being here and for agreeing to this. You've weathered much better than the rest of us, I must say, in spite of it. So perhaps it's the entomology that keeps one young. How this came about, of course, it had a long gestation. I've taught entomology, biology of insects at different levels for the past 40 years or so at the University of Pretoria. And over the years, many wonderful stories about insects, anecdotal, published, unpublished, came up, and I tried to incorporate those into my lectures to make it as interesting as I could. And then at roughly the same time, I mean, this has all happened over the last few decades, the classification started to change that you referred to, and this was largely as a result of the advent of molecular techniques, which changed how we look at relationships and our understanding of relationships. So those changed a lot of our preconceived ideas that we'd had often for 150 years or so. And some of the major groups that we had suspected should belong together, but hadn't been treated as being together, like cockroaches and termites. I mean, people generally wouldn't assume them to be closely related, but we now know that they are closely related. That's one of the major changes that's taken place. And then at the same time, over the last 20 years or so, there have been various papers, suggestions that insect numbers worldwide are declining. And this was brought to the fore by the declining numbers, especially of honeybees in North America and Europe, with the major agricultural importance of the decline because of the loss of crop pollinators. But then people started to look at natural groups of insects, and several seminal studies have shown that insect numbers are declining dramatically worldwide. One of the big ones was in Costa Rica, where they've got more than 20 years of study, and they found that not only have the insects crashed by about 80%, but so have the predators, reptiles, frogs, and the birds that depend on them. So we're talking about ecosystem collapse, basically. And for those of you who used to travel in the rural areas in South Africa 20 odd years ago or so, you'd know that if you traveled at night, the next morning you'd have to clear the windscreen and you'd have to clear your headlights because they would be smeared with insects. How many of you have had to do that in the last many years? So I think that there's certainly an indication that things are not what they should be, and this is the culmination of all of those. Then brought us to the realization that it was time to document what we know about South African insects, and to look at them from an ecological point of view, especially from the pollinators, predators, parasites, and nutrient recyclers. And this is when Hennie and Jenny and I got together. We put our heads together and decided that this was going to be the way forward. It turned out to be not the 1 or 2 years we thought, but rather a 10-year decade. It was a decade of visiting the biomes to record, photograph, and to order our ideas on the way forward. So this is the long and the short of how we came about it.
Fantastic, wonderful, and thank goodness you did endure those 10 years of traveling and looking at different places. I mean, the book is a delight to look at the different habitats. There's not only insects in there, there are interesting mammals and there are birds, and it's fascinating. Now, Jenny is the conservationist and ecologist on the team here. Jenny, how did you get involved in this particular project?
Good evening, everyone. Well, I'm a conservationist, and I was introduced to insects by Hanneke van der Merwe at La Palala Wilderness School, where I was an environmental education officer in the 90s. Ecosystem functioning and the ecological role of insects was important in our work with the children there. And then later I was employed by Dr. Gerard Verdoorn from the Endangered Wildlife Trust. I was privileged to have John as the director at that time, so I know him quite well. And in conjunction, I was employed to do this for the Endangered Wildlife Trust in conjunction with the WWF, and specifically to organize the State of South Africa Species Conference, which was in preparation of the World Summit in 2002. It was at this conference that Dr. Mervyn Mansell's paper on the state of South Africa's species, insect species, included the sentence, higher organisms exist because of the ecosystems that support them, but ecosystems exist because invertebrates, and the majority of invertebrates are insects, establish and sustain them. That fits in with Pippa's the little things that make a difference. This sentence inspired me to highlight the importance of insects. At that time, in the publication that resulted from the conference, called The Biodiversity of South Africa 2002, also published by Strake, and later when Clarke suggested that we write this book together. I wonder how many people realize that Pippa's already mentioned that there are more insects than any other organisms, but I don't know if people realize that actually more than 75% of all described living organisms are insects, and yet they attract very little interest. Their importance as ecosystem service providers is immense. They are essential for providing nutrients to the soil, pollination of plants, controlling numbers of other insect species that are pairs of other services, which we talk about in pollinators, predators, and parasites. And I must include here that the full title of the book is Pollinators, Predators, and Parasites, the Ecological Roles of Insects in Southern Africa. Okay, so why a book based on biomes? Well, since biomes consist of ecological regions made up of smaller ecosystems, and insects drive the dynamics of ecosystem functioning, biomes formed a perfect basis from which to emphasize the importance of insects. Ecological regions are characterized by particular climates, soils, and vegetation structures with distinctive combinations of plants and animals, many of which depend on each other for survival. In fact, the relationship between plants and particular insects has been so important that many species have evolved in tandem with each other. We decided to work with 9 biomes, mainly but not exclusively based on Messina and Rutherford's The Vegetation of South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland, but we added other ecosystems with unique structures, such as caves, coastal zones, and freshwater habitats. And then we added the urban environment as well, since urban areas are now quite distinct from the biomes within which they are situated. Within each biome, we discuss the ecological roles of the various insects based on the services they provide, as well as their interesting life histories. We've used the terms keystone species and ecosystem engineers throughout the book. Keystone species are those insects that have disproportionately large impacts on the ecosystem, and their removal leads to changes in the species composition of the ecosystem. For example, if you remove pollinators, there's a diet of the plant species that are involved with them. And then ecosystem engineers are those that cause structural changes to the ecosystem in which they are found. They regulate or modify the availability. It could be quantity, quality, or distribution of resources in the ecosystem. Termites and the effect on soil structure and available nutrients in the soil is a good example, which Clarke will expand on in due course. Anyway, I hope I've explained well enough my involvement and why we used biomes as the basis for the book.
Thank you, Jenny, for that background. Now, Hennie is a metallurgist who has become a fantastic photographer. He's an example of many South Africans who've, as a sort of an extension of their main training or their job, have become specialists in a new field. And we have numerous people who become citizen scientists to the extent that they are authorities on different matters. And Hennie now surely is an authority on insect photography. And I'd invite him, please, to share your journey, how you got some of the photos in this book. I'm sure our participants would be interested in what kind of camera you use. And so, Hennie, could you share that with us? And I believe you go to some strange places and get into strange positions to get up close to insects.
One of my inspirations was your book with Anthony Bannister and his photographs. He was using film cameras, and working with film is really groping around in the dark mostly, because you take the picture and if you mess up, only later you discover if it's a good picture or not. I, for instance, once went on a trip, came back with 27 rolls of film, and when we developed, there was just a few, maybe 10 photos that I could use out of 27 rolls. With digital, you have a lot of advantages, and one of the advantages is that you know exactly what you're doing moments after you've done it. Around about 2004, I started using digital. At that stage, I could only afford a very simple camera because the semi-professional, professional stuff was quite exorbitant, how expensive they were. I think this was more or less where I started. When you do photography of insects, you have to be wide awake. In this case, I discovered afterwards there was a hippo just half a kilometer upstream. So you do stupid things like that to get the shot. Originally, I was interested in dragonflies mostly, later a bit of, and only the occasional other insects. But since meeting Clarke in about 2011, I became a generalist where I started taking pictures on demand sometimes, but very often more in a serendipitous way where you see something, and if you hone in on the possibilities, then you get shots that you could use later. The other quite important aspect of digital photography is that you can do so much more with it. You can make multiple copies. That's the most obvious one and you can do slideshows, you can crop and change. And then of course, with all the software technology that's really very advanced now, Photoshop, you can manipulate photos as long as you don't change the scientific value of it. I often have to remove stuff from photographs. You crop, you improve a poor photograph. You can take a fairly cruddy picture and make something worthwhile out of it. So that was my angle on the book, is not only taking the snaps, but also trying to see if there's a story in what's right in front of you. And I think many of the examples in the book are exactly that, where you see something, you take a picture, send it to Clarke, and then you say, oh, there's a good story here, and then you start searching for the literature. So it is not only taking snapshots, but really taking a picture, see if there's a good scientific background to it. And that is the contribution that I think photography made in this book. So maybe I shouldn't go on too long, but I'm using both Canon and Nikon cameras, so a bit of a renegade in that sense. The cannon I use for very small insects, really mite-sized things, ants and so on. And the Nikon I use for larger insects. And that's usually the one that I carry around. I think 90% of the pictures in the book was taken with the Nikon. It's the lens I'm using is probably the most important part, is the 200mm macro. And then, of course, using flash photography is the other major, I would say, a development in the last 20, 30 years. Originally, you had to calculate the exposure. Nowadays, you rely on the equipment to do it. And with the multiple flash that I'm using now, you just have to press the button. Focus and press the button. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Hennie. That's wonderful, and things have come so far. When I first did my first trip, I went to Namibia. I came back with a whole bunch of films, and when they were developed, they were terrible because of, the light there is completely different. And I remember Anthony, we once went on a flight with an Eskom helicopter, and he came with a suitcase, and I said, "What's in the suitcase?" He said, "Film." And that was, he used to shoot so much film in order to get the good pictures. Now we are going to move on to the overview of the biomes, and we're going to sit back and enjoy Clarke give us a fascinating talk on the different biomes. And because Cape Town has been in the news for all the wrong reasons, with a fire down there, we're going to start with the fynbos biome. So over to you, Clarke.
Thanks, John. Just before I do, I just want to, another comment about Hennie. Besides being in crocodile-infested waters there and trying to get the perfect shot, he also went into a cave to photograph cave insects and got himself histoplasmosis and was very sick for some months. And that was in the days before the association between bats and COVID. And now I can't get him to go into caves at all anymore. And we've got a whole lot of insects that we'd still like to photograph, but he's chickened out completely. Right. Right, the first slide of the fynbos. This is just a general shot just to set the scene. What's important to notice there is, besides the mountains, is the fog coming in. This is a characteristic of the late afternoon, and in summer with the southeasterly blowing, and a lot of the insects are dependent, or the high mountain insects are dependent on this because this is summer and dry season. And then of course the fynbos we started with as well in the book, I think possibly because it's one of the world-renowned of the six, one of six floral regions in the world. Extremely high endemicity, and about a third or so of all insects, of all plants in South Africa occur in the fynbos. And of course, a lot of those plants are associated in one way or another with insects. And what's relevant, and what John has just referred to, of course, is the fires. We've just had these very devastating fires very recently with all the damage that it's caused. Fires are a natural part of the fynbos. But not at the frequency that they occur now, because the frequencies are as a result of human activities, invasion by alien plants, and then just burning at completely the wrong time of the year. So in fact, the fires shouldn't be more than once in 10 years or so. One of the tragic cases that we have recently is an extinction. We're almost sure that it's an extinction of a butterfly, the Brenton blue butterfly. It was discovered in 1858 and wasn't seen for 119 years. And then it was discovered again in Nature's Valley by Jonathan Ball in 1977. So a full 119 years. And it had a very small area of distribution, about the size of a rugby field or so. And so the Lepidopterist Society and Jonathan Ball got together and had it declared the Brenton Blue Nature Reserve. Well, the devastating fires, that was in 2003, then the devastating fires, the Knysna fires in 2017, 28, seemed to have blitzed that whole population. and the butterfly hasn't been seen since, so we assume that it is now extinct. A lot of the native plants are dependent on fire, as I've just mentioned. Many of the plants actually die after natural fires, but they release their seeds. The seeds are fire resistant. The seeds, so the adult plant dies, and then these seeds are dropped, and the seeds then have a very attractive protein body, fat body attached to them called an elaeosome, and the native ants are cued in, and they respond to within minutes to finding the seeds, carrying them into their nests and eating the elaeosome off, and then leaving the seed unharmed in their nests, where they are protected, planted basically underground, and in a warm environment, in a rich environment of organic matter. But what's happened in the last 100 years or so was the introduction of the Argentine ant in the bottom right-hand corner here. The Argentine ant, which will be familiar to many of the people living in the Western Cape, probably introduced during the Boer War. It's an aggressive ant, and it's displacing our native ants, with the result that the seeds that are co-evolved with the plant seeds that are co-evolved with the native ants are not being buried, and they're not being protected. So the Argentine ant displaces the local ants, and they may eat the elaeosome off the seed, but otherwise they just leave it lying there, where it's exposed to more fires and to rodents. So the whole process is one that's slowly deteriorating, and many of our iconic Western Cape plants like proteas, Dysa orchids are dependent on them. Our sports teams would have to rethink their sports emblems. We would no longer have the Dysa emblem on the Western Province rugby jersey, the Barberton daisy on the Blue Bulls rugby jersey, the protea on the cricketers and the netball players. They'll probably all just have to end up with a genetically modified maize plant as the emblem on their jerseys, because all the beautiful natural plants will have gone belly up. But some of these cunning plants have gone one step further, and there are two restios in the book that we're talking about. There's only one example, but anyway, we now, since the book was published, we've now found a second example. But these restios produce a big nut, and restios, for those of you who don't know, are grass-like plants that are very dominant in the fynbos. These two species of restios, as far as we know, produce these large round nuts, and not only are they big and round, but they also smell, and the analyses have been done, they also smell like antelope dung. So the dung beetles are fooled by them, completely fooled by them, so they collect them, roll them away, bury them, and then start to nibble on them and find that there's something seriously wrong here, and they then leave them buried in the ground where they're protected and planted and sheltered. So without the insects in the fynbos, things would look very different. This is a very unusual beetle, one of Africa's only CITES listed groups of beetles that occurs only on the high mountain peaks of a few peaks in the fynbos, and all of them occur on a very small area. This one on an area about the size of a rugby field or so. And these beetles were forced progressively over thousands of years up to the top of the mountains, where conditions in summer particularly stay fairly moist and habitable for them. But they're threatened by, of course, by modern climate changes. And then this particular species, 5 years ago or so, an internet company illegally went and plonked an internet tower in the middle of the population of this particular species. So there's been a whole long revolt by scientists and the public, and eventually Cape Nature got them to remove their tower. These beetles sell for astronomical amounts in the international insect trade. I've got a safe full of them for my pension, so if anybody would like to negotiate with me, not really. It's illegal to keep them. And then because it was so difficult for us to try and summarize the different aspects of the ecology and the importance of the different insects across the biomes, we settled just to talk about mainly termites, although I will refer to some other insects, and the termites are probably the most important insects in terms of many of their ecological attributes. They recycle nutrients, and they're also major ecosystem engineers. So the first one then is the so-called black mound termite in the fynbos. The fynbos is, you can see the soils are white and sandy and nutrient poor. The termites occur in mosaics, and they feed mostly on partially decomposed plant matter, because fynbos plants are full of chemicals. So the termites only start to feed on them when the chemicals are broken down as a result of UV and wind and weather. And then they turn them into these mounds. The mounds die off after about 20 or 25 years or so. And then they break down, and all of those nutrients, the black is from feces, termite feces, dead bodies, and compost that's worked into the system. So that then becomes a nutrient hotspot. You get whole mosaics of these. I'll show you another example in the grassveld where we have a similar situation. Then we move up the coast to the succulent karoo, the richest succulent desert, in the world. Once again, with extremely high endemicity, and most of the plants, well-known plants, are known to be pollinated by insects, so that they have a very strict relationship, a very important relationship. And without the insects, we wouldn't have these spectacular floral displays that attract people from all over the world. Here's one of the very spectacular flies. That's an important pollinator on the facies and the daisies and various other plants. And also the one on the cover of our book is another one of those. The pollinators are incredibly important, and there's some groups, unfortunately we can't go into the details, but some groups that occur where most of the world fauna of a particular group occurs only in this area. Then one of the most important groups in the succulent karoo is the harvester termite, the so-called Hivoki termite. These termites have underground nests, unlike most of the others that have the typical above ground mounds. But what these do is that, their nests are connected. They have hundreds of foraging tunnels that stretch over hundreds of meters from the central nest. And then every now and again, they pop up and they have a foraging tunnel such as we have here. And then when a foraging tunnel is forming, if the soil's moist, then the soil that they push out coalesces, and then you get these mounds forming. These are not termite mounds in the true sense of the word. These are really just piles of soil, but the termites are bringing up subterranean soils of different kinds. They're changing the chemical structure completely of the soil, and then they also, of course, are incorporating nutrients into that soil. So what then happens after hundreds or thousands of years is you get these Hivokis. That's just an Afrikaans word for a little mound or a little hill. Here in the foreground, with a bit of imagination, you can see one that's slightly raised. They're eventually only about a meter in the middle, and they're up to about 20 or 30, some of them 20 or 30 meters across. But then everything about them is changed biologically. So the soil type is completely different. The organic content is completely different. Water penetration is completely different. The nutrient status changes completely. The composition of the soil itself, the physical properties of the soil. And the result is that you get a completely different vegetation patterns growing on the Hivokis. And they're very attractive to other animals. Grazers, a lot of rodents move in, rodents burrow into them and make more tunnels. So you get the Hivokis, then each Hivoki then becomes a little island of activity in the middle of the sea of less palatable plants and that sort of thing. So a major and very important ecological engineer. They also, food for many organisms. We're going to get back to the importance of termites for food, but those Hivoki termites are very important food for some of the small mammals like bat-eared foxes and aardvark and that sort of thing that occur in these areas. Then if we move on to the grassland, this is an area, one of our most threatened biomes. Those of you who live on the Highveld will know it, but anyway, most of the pristine grasslands are now maize fields, but anyway, we still have some, and then with the backbone of the Drakensberg in the background. Some of our most endangered orchids occur in this area. It's another area that has very severe natural fires, but also very cold winters. So the winters are very harsh. And then in summer, especially after the first rains, you get these orchids, and after fires, you get these orchids popping up. This is one of the rarest of the orchids in the grassland, and it's pollinated exclusively by the spider hunting wasp. Then not only are the plants and the insects and all sorts of other animals and organisms endangered, but some of our mammals were brought to the brink of extinction, some of the grassland mammals. One of them was the black wildebeest. It was down to about a handful of species on a farm. But now, luckily, it's been revived. But saving the black wildebeest is not only about the black wildebeest, but it's also about their parasites. This cute little teddy bear-like thing here is a nasal worm, nasal bot. Those are not the eyes at the end there. Those are actually respiratory spiracles. This is the anus, looks like the mouth. You've got to admit that it's pretty cute looking. The mouth parts are at the other end. They're just two hooks, and then with which they dig into the mucous membranes in the nasal cavity of the wildebeest. So what happens is that you get this fly, which is a rather handsome fellow. They have a complex life cycle. The fly goes and it lays tiny live maggots in the eye of the wildebeest. Those then penetrate a blood vessel in the eye and then go from the blood vessel into the cardiovascular system of the wildebeest. And there they stay for about half of their development, and then they get into a trachea, into the trachea, and then work their way up into the sinuses of the wildebeest. And then eventually you have a handful of these. They're about the size of the tip of your little finger, wobbling around inside the wildebeest. Yeah, you can see he's probably trying to tickle them out with his nose. But because they're embedded in the mucus of the mucous membranes of the sinuses, they buried, about half of them is buried in mucus, so which is why the back half has to stick out. And then they breathe they breathe from the free air that the wildebeest is breathing in. When they mature, the wildebeest sneezes them out, they pupate in the ground, and then you get the cycle repeated with this rather handsome fly, then starting the cycle again. Now we get back to termites again. Those of you on the Highveld will recognize these. This is the snouted harvester termite. It's called the snouted harvester because the soldiers have these snouts with which they secrete a sticky repellent substance to tangle the mouth parts of their predators like ants and spiders and that sort of thing. So it's a predatory device. But anyway, the termites, as you can see, there are a large number of mounds here, and only about 10% of the mounds are living. The others are dead mounds, which deteriorate and decompose over time. So the living mounds they collect grass, and they go through the cycles that I've talked about with nutrient recycling and the soil improvements. And then once again, after about 25 years or so, they die. And then you get, over time, you get a progression of the plants changing in the middle here. Very palatable grasses growing where the termite mound originally was. And then, of course, this becomes very favorable grazing for different kinds of grazers, and you get a whole mosaic of them, with many of them developing in a particular area. A lot of the iconic mammals that occur in the grassland and on the edge of the Kalahari, such as the aardvark, are entirely dependent on social insects and like termites and ants. The pangolin, the aardvark, the aardwolf, things like bat-eared foxes and that sort of thing. The recent drought in the Kalahari on Tswalu Kalahari Reserve, those of you who know about Tswalu will know that the drought of the last 5 or 6 years has impacted so seriously on termite and ant numbers that food for the aardvark deteriorated to such an extent that they started to starve, and eventually the aardvark were dying as a result of starvation. So it was a cascading effect of drought, no food, no social insects, no food for the aardvark, and death of one of Africa's most iconic mammals. And just as an aside, those of you who watched Al Jazeera last night may have seen the conservation program where they talked about the plight of pangolins. And of course, pangolins are in the same category of iconic endangered mammals that depend entirely on social insects. And the program that they showed last night at a market in Vietnam, there was 90 tons of pangolin scales on show. 90 tons, and they estimated that this was in excess of 100,000 animals that had been killed just for those, for the scales. So this is the enormity of the problem. So not only is habitat destruction, but also, of course, in the cases that we're talking about here, their dependence on insects. The iconic big mounds of, these are iconic. I've jumped a little bit to the savanna, and I'll get back to the savanna in a moment. But these big mounds that are so well known across Africa, a mound such as that is about 3 or 4 meters tall, and they've displaced between 30 and 50 tons or so. The termites have displaced 30 or 50 or so tons of soil. Now, if you imagine that you have this tower 5 or 6 meters across the base and 3 or 4 meters or 5 meters tall, then there's that much displacement underground. So there's that much space in cavities and tunnels and nesting material and feces and all the rest that's introduced into the mound. So you have the improvement in the system, but also these major physical changes. And the physical changes then are used by all kinds of other animals. For instance, the cavities in them are used by anything that from beetles, lizards, these dwarf mongooses, and all the way up to big monitor lizards. And of course, if aardvark have been digging into the base to get to the termite colony, they leave a big cavity into which other animals like porcupines and that sort of thing then move. So the physical changes, the engineering changes the termites cause are absolutely immense. Then the Namib, the very famous sand sea where Sossos Vlei is positioned. This is about 34,000 square kilometers of sand, wind drifting sand dunes, with some of the highest dunes up to about 300 meters in the world there. And the insects that live there are on average relatively low numbers, but very high endemicity. So the insects that occur there occur nowhere else. And of course, to live in an environment like this, they have to be able to cope with living in a sandy environment, in a windy environment, in a hot environment, in an exposed environment, and then in a very dry environment. So the insects that occur there, I'd just like to show you a few of them. One of the biggest groups of beetles are the beetles, the so-called Darkling Beetles. They are related to the famous toktokis that many people will know about. These don't actually talk, but they do other things that are interesting. But the one on the top left, for instance, is a flat beetle, and they have on the side of the body, they have apertures that open into the spiracles, and by running fast, they cool down. Like, and those of you who used to drive Volkswagen Beetles will know that that was the principle of the Volkswagen Beetle. It was an air-cooled engine. So these beetles have an air-cooled engine. When it gets too hot, they dive into the sand. This one has very long legs. And when it starts to get, it's slow moving. And when it starts to get hot, it starts to raise itself onto its legs until it's standing on tiptoes so that its body is raised up above the hot sand. This one, as you can see, is flat, called a flying saucer beetle, and they burrow into the sand, and they are capable of actually swimming in the sand, so they can move very quickly in the sand. This one is a small beetle, only about 5 millimeters long or so, with very long legs, and that pattern on them is a camouflage pattern, and they become active when the wind blows, and when the wind blows in the Namib, it blows in a lot of detritus from surrounding areas, bits of leaves, of seed, flowers. These beetles run around in this maelstrom of floating debris, and they look just like that. So for them, it's camouflage, and then they're feeding on the little bits that are floating around with them. And then the last and specialized adaptation they have is the famous fog-standing beetle that collects water. These beetles are active when they're usually day active, but then in the early mornings when the fog comes in, they're still cold. And they stagger out. You can see this one is a little bit uncoordinated. They stagger out onto the dunes, and then when the fog comes in, the fog condenses on them. All they need to do is get their backside higher than their mouths, and the water condenses on them and runs down to their mouths where they can drink it. So this is another one of the very special adaptations that insects have to acquire, and the plants and various other animals then acquire moisture from the fog. The Nama Karoo is one that many of you will be familiar with if you've ever driven from Gauteng down to the Cape. It more or less starts, well, south of Kimberley, but by the time you get to about Colesberg or so, and then all the way down to about Worcester, you drive through the Central Karoo or the Nama Karoo, considered by a lot of people to be boring. You know, their children complain about it being boring on the drive through, but in fact, it's anything but boring. But once again, here we have nutritionally impoverished soils, and here we have an ant that acts as an ecological equivalent of the termites. So the termites are there, but this ant then supplements what the termites does, and these are harvester termites called Mesor, which they named after a Greek god of harvest called Mesor, and they harvest on different bits of plant matter, especially seeds, and then all kinds of other fallen material, which they carry back to their nests. They eat bits of it, and then the rest of it is expelled onto nest mounds surrounding the nests. And then eventually when these degrade, some of the seeds are viable, and they then start to grow. They can germinate as soon as it rains. They can germinate for the same reasons we had earlier, where the nutritional value has improved. The organic matter is high, water absorption is high, and experiments done by Richard Dean in the Karoo found that all the important nutrients like nitrogen, potassium increased dramatically, up to about 50% more than the soils around them, as a result of the work by the ants. And he also found that plants that establish, woody plants that establish on these, eventually on these mounds, have much higher seed set and more nutritious leaves for herbivores. So a massive importance. They also cause these mosaics that improves these pockets of improved nutritional conditions. Then also these are the food for aardvark. The aardvark then dig open the nests, distribute a lot of the material. They swallow some of the soil, some of the seeds, and so the next level, the next trophic level, where the aardvark eat the ants and then move off. They then excrete some of the seeds and so spread the whole system even further. So what starts off just with ants collecting seeds and plant matter, then eventually gets distributed over much of the dry part of the infertile parts of the crew. But living with ants, and this is not only with those ants, but with all ants, we have some very specialized predatory beetles. I just want to mention them here so that we give the predators some mileage. But these are related to bombardier beetles, ground beetles, and that sort of thing. But they're very specialized. They're covered in glands, and their antennae are very glandular. So what they do is they prey in ant nests. So they'll fly into and land outside an ant nest, and the ants will come running out to find out what the commotion is about. And then the beetles produce these substances which are very attractive to the ants. And then the ants climb all over them and discuss amongst each other that we need somebody like this in our house. And then they grab onto the antennae and drag the ants into their nests. The beetles then prey on ants and ant brood. They lay their eggs in there, and then the larvae also develop into ant predators. And the larvae have, on the tip of their abdomen, they have a cup-shaped structure into which they secrete appeasement substances. So when they're threatened by ants, they offer the ant some of this appeasement substance, and the ant has a lick and then says, okay, you can go ahead and eat my babies, I don't mind. So the whole life cycle is one of a very specialized predatory behavior inside the ant nest, and they only come out to distribute, to disperse to other places. And then a very topical species that I'm sure many of you know about is the brown locust, or the Karoo locust, which periodically breaks out. There was an outbreak in the eastern Karoo recently in South Africa, but it wasn't a particularly big outbreak, but I am going to talk about them. But at the same time, this is one of about 5 or so outbreak locusts in Africa, one of which is the biblical locust, Locusta, one of the plagues of ancient Egypt, that has, it's actually usually has a year cycle, but these past 2 years, it's gone over from a year cycle to a 2-year cycle, and has absolutely decimated northeastern, pardon me, northeastern Africa, and then come all the way down into Kenya, where they absolutely decimate crops. And some rather clever people in Kenya have decided to harvest them. There's such numbers of them, so the locusts perch in trees at night, and then the locals beat them off. And they've apparently been collecting up to about 500 kilograms of locusts per village. These are then dumped into boiling water, and then in the next day they're dried out, eventually milled and fed to livestock. But of course, to get a ton of locusts, they've probably eaten 10 tons of maize. So it's a trade-off. But anyway, then to get back to our Karoo locust, our own locust, these build up in the Karoo. And then when you get a build-up, you get these tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of these little hoppers. It looks like red water flowing across roads. They're called rooi bikies, little red jackets in the area. Very active, hard to photograph because they literally flow off in direction. They just keep moving, stop at night, feed and grow. Eventually they grow into adults after about 3 weeks or so, and then they start to fly. And then that's the major pest stage. Then they fly mostly in Southern Africa. They then fly northwards into the Highveld, into grain crops, into Namibia, into Botswana. They're under control by Department of Agriculture, but every now and again they do escape. And there have been plans to harvest them as well, but unfortunately not much has come of it. The problem is that the time to harvest is in the adult stage, but the adults move very fast. They move up to 100 kilometers a day or so. So you set up a system, and then by the next day, they're gone. Right, the savanna then, one of the very familiar biomes. It's the biggest biome in Africa, the biggest in Southern Africa, and this is also where most of our big national parks lie in the east, the Kruger Park, of course, and then in the far west, in the arid savanna, the Kalahari Trans-Frontier Park between South Africa and Namibia, at least South Africa and Botswana. So the savannas are characterized, it probably has the richest insect fauna, like it does probably have of the mammal fauna and probably of the bird fauna, but it's thought to have amongst the richest insect fauna. And one of the interesting and important groups of insects are those associated with figs, fig fruit, which are actually not fruit, they call it a syconium. It's actually a capsule with flowers inside, and the fruits actually develop inside. So what we eventually eat in a ripe fruit is the syconium with the little seeds inside it. But anyway, the life cycle of figs is very complex, and every species of figs, of which there are many, has a species of just one species of pollinating wasp. And this is what the female looks like. And the cycle is such that at the start of the season, she will emerge from an overwintering, a mated female will emerge from an overwintering fig, and then she'll find the right figs or the right tree of the right, at the right stage. And then she has to force her way through a tiny little hole called an ostiole. And that ostiole only allows a single species of wasp to penetrate, and that is the pollinator. But it's a hazardous business because she ends up losing her antennae, she loses her wings, she loses some legs, but eventually gets inside and then lays eggs inside the plant. This funny looking thing here is a male. We'll get back to the male. I just want to go to the next slide just to show you what it looks like. So when you eat a fig and you get those little crunchy bits, this is actually what you're eating. No, not really. The crunchy bits that you eat are long after the wasps have gone. The crunchy bits are the seeds. But anyway, it's just, so what you have inside is these wasps, these females with a short ovipositor there, the egg-laying apparatus is short. So these are the ones that force their way through the ostiole. There could be many, and they will lay eggs on the flowers inside the syconium, inside the fig. And those eggs will develop into males and females. The males will then, that's when you get back to that funny looking male, they break out of their cell, and then they mate with females still incarcerated in their cells. So they've got a special drill on their genitalia. They drill through the wall of the flower and mate with the females inside the fig. Right, but then you get ones like these here, which complicate the system completely. They can't get into the fig because the ostiole doesn't allow them in because they're the wrong species, but they're parasites of these ones. So what they do is they have this very long ovipositor. So they drill holes through the side of the syconium and lay eggs on side the pollinating figs inside the wasp. And then, so they then, this is their stage of the cycle, is they parasitize. And there are many different species that parasitize the wasps in the figs. Right, we're running a little bit slow, sorry everybody. Then we can't not talk about dung beetles in the savannas. Dung beetles are everywhere. I just like to mention just a statistic, just to get a feel for the importance of dung beetles. Cattle produce, there are 15 million cattle, and so many of you will have probably heard this, but anyway, cattle produce on average about 500,000 tons of dung per day in South Africa. 10,000 elephants in the Kruger Park produce about 150 kilograms of dung each per day. 30,000 buffalo produce about 20 kilograms of dung each per day, and politicians. So we have a huge amount of dung accumulating every day in South Africa. What happens to it? The dung beetles bury it and remove it and fertilize the soil and aerate the soil and allow water to penetrate. And then just a little bit of fun. I'm sure many of you will have seen dung beetles, 2 dung beetles involved in a ball. You'll see one is doing a lot of the work and the other one is just riding along. Well, the male is the one doing the work and the female is the back seat driver. She's sitting on top, giving instructions a little to the left, a little to the right. You idiot, there's something coming up. And so they also have their problems. And then the last habitat is the freshwater habitat. Hennie's speciality, freshwater habitats vary in South Africa from everything from big, wide, warm waters, such as we get in the east, to cold mountain streams, puddles after rain, dams on farms, water troughs and drinking troughs and that sort of thing on farms and in various parts. And all of those are home to different aquatic insects. The most familiar to most people and the major predators are dragonflies. This rather mean-looking fellow is a dragonfly nymph. They're the major predators in the water. And they have this disc under the head called a mask, and it's on a hinge. And what they do when they, and it's got teeth and clasping fingers on the tip. And when they see a tadpole or something like that, they shoot it out, grab the prey and bring it closer and then eat it. So it's a specialized adaptation. To live in water, of course, you also need to be able to breathe in water. The damselflies, dragonflies, the group dragonflies are divided into 2 groups, damselflies and dragonflies. Damselflies, the nymphs, the underwater nymphs, have glands, have gills on the tail through which they breathe. The dragonflies are these squat ones. They don't have exposed gills, but they have a rectal system where they suck water into the rectum. They absorb the oxygen from the water and then they expel the water, but which they also use then for jet propulsion. So they then squirt out the water, with which they then jump forward. So when they keep a rectum full of water, when they're threatened by a frog or something, they squirt out water and then leap forward. Then finally, dragonflies have a really kinky reproductive system. The males have 2 sets of genitalia in both groups of termites, dragonflies, sorry. The damselflies and the dragonflies. So what happens is a male, a sexually mature male has the 2 sets of genitalia. It produces sperm on the tip of the abdomen, and then it folds his abdomen round and deposits the sperm in a special cavity at the basal segment of the abdomen. And then he goes out and hunts for a female. In the 2 species, mating is not a terribly refined business. In the damselflies, the male grabs the female on the thorax. In the dragonflies, the male grabs the female behind the head, and then they fly in this wheel position. First in the tandem position, the female's abdomen hanging down, then eventually she folds it up and she collects the sperm package from the male, and then they fly in this position until she becomes fertilized, and then they break away. So then before we get on to that, John, that's the end of my story. Thank you all for your patience. I'm sorry we got a little bogged down in the technicalities, but John has a few words more to say before we close off.
Clarke, thank you very much. That was a fascinating talk. So interesting. We could listen to you for a long, long time. Jenny, we were going to ask you to say a few words about the book production. I see that most of our participants are still with us. So if you could very, very quickly tell us a little bit about the production, what you were involved in. I'm sure it's very interesting.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, I had a very specific idea of the layout of the book before we even wrote the first word. And I was fortunate to have worked for SAMBI in the publication department, where I was exposed to lots of natural history books with wonderful layouts. And it was while looking at those that I formed an idea of what our book could look like when we one day, because we'd often spoken about producing a book together, So I came up with ideas, and then I saw that quite a few books use the text box idea, and mainly textbooks actually use the text boxes. But I like that idea, and I like the big photographs and various sizes between big and small photographs. But then the text boxes I particularly wanted added to the book because it gave us the opportunity to highlight very interesting facts, or as a means for including stories that didn't exactly fit into the narrative of the chapters. So that's just as far as the lab's concerned. But then I must say that I had these ideas and to put them into practice, or to help to try and explain what I had in my mind, was actually quite hard. But I'm very grateful to Strake, to Pippa for taking our project on. She had a lot, she believed in us, and thank you for that. But then particularly to Helen de Villiers and Janice Evans, who very kindly included me in the design work and patiently listened to and implemented some of my ideas. And then together with their expertise, they produced something much more beautiful than I could ever have imagined. And I really want to thank them for that. And then I must also add that without Hennie's breathtakingly beautiful photographs, we would never have produced a book such as this. So I would like to say, everybody, I'm sure lots of you have got your glasses of wine there next to you, and we're waiting to have ours. Please raise your glasses to Hennie, because his photographs are just, they make the book. Thank you, Hennie.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Hennie. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to our participants. We're going to deal with a few questions and answers in a minute. I just want to make an announcement that the webinar has been recorded, and it'll be up on the Penguin Random House YouTube South Africa channel, where you can go. All the people who've registered for this webinar will follow up with you, and if you have questions that we don't manage to answer this time, we'll answer them with an email. So thank you to everyone that participated. Thank you to our panel, and I'm going to have a look at the Q&A sections. Hivoki de Klerk asks if there's a link between neusworm in wildebeest and the disease snotsiekte called by a virus. I don't think so, but what we'll do is we'll find out and answer your questions by email. What else have we got? If Karoo locusts are indigenous, what is their natural food? They do decimate crops, but what was their food before the crops were planted? Clark, would you like to answer that? Was it indigenous grass?
Yes, it was. The Karoo, we now consider it to be a bossyveld, but apparently it was originally largely grass. A lot of it was grassland, and the locusts would mainly have eaten native grasses.
Thank you for that. James Harrison, hi James, my immense congratulations, wonder and awe. It's such a wondrous book, full marks and beyond to the authors and all involved in the book production, writing, photography, editing and production. You have all done the insects proud. Thank you, James. Authors, please take a bow. Erika van Schalkwijk says, does the number of armored crickets currently in the Kruger Park influence the number of dung beetles? We saw large numbers of armored crickets and almost zero dung beetles when we were there last week. Clark, do you have any ideas on that?
Yes, the armored crickets build up in years with good early rains. And so they mature around about now. So usually at this time of the year is when you see most of them. If there was a particularly dry spell just when the person was visiting the Kruger Park, that would have depressed the dung beetles. They're very dependent on moisture. So I suspect that it was just a lull in dung beetle activity, and the Gurren cricks or the armored ground crickets just happened to be very obvious at the time.
All right. Thank you, Clark. There are a couple of other questions, but we've run out of time, and we will respond to those by email. So once again, thank you to the panel. Good luck on the publication of this book. I'm sure it is going to be very, very well received. It's a fantastic milestone in publishing. South Africa has got an incredible natural history book publishing industry. And we're very, very lucky to have these wonderful books produced by everybody. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and good night to all of you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.